South Carolina enters what I would consider a make-or-break season for Shane Beamer with a win total of 6.5, plus 116 to the over, minus 142 to the under. And the reason this is such a huge season is due to the disappointment last year. I think you can go back 2 out of the last 3 years have been disappointing and very underwhelming, but specifically last season, they entered the year, number 11th in the preseason AP poll. They brought back Lenora Sellers after a tremendously hyped and successful end to the 2024 season, as well as Dylan Stewart, 2 guys who were fantastic as true freshmen and redshirt freshmen. But you thought, hey, that was only year 1. Imagine what they're going to be in year 2. And I think people kind of overlooked the losses that South Carolina had on both sides of the ball with Kennard, Sanders, Eamon Warrior on defense, all these guys that got drafted. On offense, they lost Rocket Sanders, and that proved to be a pretty big loss. The run game took a massive step back. They lost Josh Simon. Obviously, the offensive line was still a disaster, which has been the issue for Shane Beamer's tenure at South Carolina the whole time. Even in 2024, I don't think it was great, but it was good enough. It held the duct tape over the dam, so to speak, and Lenora Sellers was able to be dynamic enough and make plays on his own enough to overcome that issue due to personal brilliance. I also think that we kind of overprojected this leap from Nick Harbor that's been present for a long time now, ever since he got to college as a 5-star, everything track athlete, one of the fastest players in the country, also huge physical freak. I vividly remember one fantastic catch he made at Mizzou back in 2023 as a true freshman that was eye-popping. His overpoweredness in the college football 25 game kind of, I honestly think, built on some of that hype too. And so you could see why there was high expectations surrounding last season. But, and I was not one of those people, remember, I was pretty low on South Carolina, but to play devil's advocate against myself here, I'm perpetually low on this program under Shane Beamer, and I've just never really been all that impressed. They've had, in my opinion, they've had a couple good seasons, but they've really only had one good team, and that was the 2024 team. In 2022, sure, they went 8-4, but if you really dig deeper, that team finished outside the top 30 in SP+. They kind of caught some breaks in some one-score games. They had a fantastic last 2 games of the season, but other than that, they were pretty average most of the year. And so, they entered 2023 with a little bit of hype, failed massively. And then I think with Shane Beamer with his back to the wall, starts 2024, barely escapes Old Dominion, and then they rattle off a really impressive season. They lose the bowl game, but nevertheless, all this hype comes back, and they fall flat on their face again. So I think this year is really the inflection point for Shane. It's kind of interesting to think about what number of wins do they have to get to keep his job safe, or is there a number? I personally never have thought it's intelligent to set a number on wins for a coach to keep his job in a sport with a sample size of 12 games. In this case, it's really 10 because, again, they have two certain outcome games with their G5 and FCS that they're going to win. So you're really going to leave it up to a kick or something? I mean, if you just look back at Shane Beamer's tenure back in 2024, they lose Lenora Sellers and have to play a second half against LSU in a game they were kind of dominating with Robbie Ashford, and then they miss a game-tying kick. So had he made that kick and they go on to win that game, obviously that was a good season. But I'm just saying, if something like that happened in this season, that's going to be what determines whether or not Shane Beamer keeps his job or not. I think that's a dumb way to think about it. To me, I would look at it as, okay, you've made some bad offensive coordinator hires. You made one decent one in Dow Loggins. I still don't think he was great, but nevertheless, you could see it as a success because he got a G5 head coaching job at App State. But the Satterfield hire, the Mike Shula hire, which was predictably pretty terrible. I mean, this wasn't a situation where of Clemson hiring a hot coordinator like Garrett Riley and he just fails, and you couldn't really have seen that coming. I think a lot of people could have seen the failure of Mike Shula coming. But now you bring in Kendall Briles, and I'll give him credit now. I think that's a very, very, very good hire. So obviously that doesn't matter. What matters is what happens on the field. To me, the question is, how does the offense look? Does it look more organized? Did you fix some issues in the portal on the offensive line? Obviously, if you're playing well and you suffer a bunch of injuries, it's a different story, which is why I think you shouldn't just set a win total. You have to get to 7 to keep your job. You have to go over 6.5 to keep your job. There's too much nuance and context that goes into that. Do you develop a little bit more of a running game this year? Does Lenora Sellers bounce back after a bad year and start to really develop as a passer, as a pocket passer? Because I don't really feel like he's gotten a lot better in 2 full seasons as a starting quarterback. I guess I would look at it as, how good of a team are you? Because with these 9-game SEC schedules and then playing Clemson on the road, it's very possible this is a top 20 team that goes 6-6 or 5-7. 5-7 would be tough to swallow, but 6-6, and they go 1-4 in one-score games, and their schedule ends up being even harder than it looks. And you had a good team, but you fire the coach, and now you hire a new coach, and he's got to rebuild. And are the prospects of having a better team really there? It's TBD. Now, I would argue you fire the coach because the future of the program isn't looking bright, and that's just why I've never been a huge Shane Beamer fan. I don't think that he's ever going to have South Carolina consistently winning 8, 9, 10 games a year, or, if you want to peel it back and give a more context-proof scenario here, I don't think he's ever going to consistently have top 15 to 20 teams there. So taking a look at this year, they bring back by far and away the 2 most important players on their team, with Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers, 2 guys that at certain points have projected to be top 10 picks in the NFL draft. They remove Mike Shula, bring in Kendall Briles, who I'm still very high on, I should say. They retool the offensive line with Jacarius Peak and a few other guys. They've had some injuries during spring. I think one guy got hurt playing basketball recreationally, which could be an issue. But nevertheless, a lot of changes around South Carolina. I think you tip your cap to Shane Beamer for recognizing some issues they've had and attempting to address those. And they come into this year ranked 23rd in the FPI, which we're going to get to later, the controversy surrounding the FPI. You open with Kent State and Towson, so it should be nice to get 2 teams like that early on to sort of get your feet wet with the new offensive system, the new offensive line, and play together. And then you get Mississippi State at home, so you really get 3 games that are very winnable to sort of ramp up and get the full speed before you go to Alabama, which I like getting that on the road because I think you're probably losing that regardless. Although, to play devil's advocate for South Carolina, they've played Alabama tremendously tough the last 2 seasons, coming up a few points shy at home last year as a big underdog, kind of when their season was sort of off the rails already. And then 2 years ago in Bryant-Denny Stadium, they scored that late touchdown, the weird onside kick, failed the 2-point conversion, just a crazy ending. So they've played admirably against Alabama the last 2 seasons, despite probably being at a roster disadvantage. And then you get Kentucky at home. So you really can't script up a easier 5-game start to the season that you should very well be 4-1. And if you're not, are looking at some serious issues. Then you go to Florida, but you get Tennessee at home, a Tennessee team that I think will be better than most people think, but is not one that people project to contend for the league. They sit with a 7.5 win total, around the 20s, I think, in most rankings and power ratings. So you get them at home. That's probably a coin flip game. You go to Oklahoma. You get Texas A&M at home. You go to Arkansas versus Georgia and at Clemson. One thing that I think is a positive for, I said I think again. Got to get better. We got to improve. One thing that's a positive for this South Carolina schedule to me is there's not really back-to-back gauntlets, or not maybe 4 straight gauntlets like you see a lot of these SEC teams will have these 5-game stretches that look like AFC East schedules sometimes, where, okay, you get Mississippi State at home, and then you go to Alabama, and then you get to come back home and you get Kentucky. Then you go to Florida, a Florida team that somewhere around the high teens, low 20s in the ratings. But then you get Tennessee at home. Okay, you go to Oklahoma, and you play Texas A&M, but you get them at home. That's two tough games for sure, but you get one at home, and it's probably two teams that are good, not great. And then you go to Arkansas, and then Georgia at home and at Clemson's the tough 2-game stretch. But who knows what Clemson's going to be? I don't think anybody's high on them or expecting them to contend for the ACC. They obviously lose, 9 draft picks. Their win total is sitting around 6.5, 7.5. So to me, you get the second, the third, 5th, 6th, 7th, 9th best teams in the SEC, and then you get 3 of the bottom 4 with Mississippi State, Kentucky, and at Arkansas. And I think again. Damn it. I would say that you get the perfect location permutation for those 3 opponents, where you get Mississippi State and Kentucky at home. Those 2 teams probably, to me, are the 14th and 15th best teams in the league. And then there's a pretty clear 16 slot for Arkansas, where you get that one on the road. So that's a game that you're more likely to win regardless, and you get it on the road. And then you get the 2 slightly better opponents at home, and you get 2 of those 3 opponents at home, which probably isn't optimal if you want to win 9 or 10 games or contend for a playoff spot, because it means you have to go to Alabama and you have to go to Oklahoma and to the Swamp. But if you're just trying to get to 6-7 wins and save your job, you want all these peer programs in the 30s and 40s in the ratings at home to maximize your chance of just getting to 3 or 4 conference wins. In the Clemson game on the road, I don't think that's going to be an easy one. Now, it's important to note that Clemson hasn't beat South Carolina at home since 2013, I believe, when they had their watch party for the SEC East spoiled by Henry Josie. But they've won the last 2 games in Death Valley, so a place they've had some success recently. I don't really think that matters. This Clemson team's turned over a lot since 2024 and 2022. I almost think it'll work. I said I think again. It'll actually work against them, because Clemson's going to sort of have get back on their mind, some vengeance on their mind, given that they've lost the last 2 at home against South Carolina. And Dabo Swinney's been known to, he likes to play the little old Clemson chip on the shoulder card, which will be very present for the Tigers this year. I'm going to go under 6.5 for a few reasons. I get plus 116 juice to the, or no, I swapped those. I get minus 140. I have to take minus 142 to take the under. Plus 116 to the over. That's not going to change my pick, though, because if I'm going to project this team to win 7 games or more against this schedule without knowing turnover luck and one-score game luck, and I will say this, South Carolina, always very good on special teams. You almost can just pencil them in for being on the positive end of the variance of blocked field goals, fake field goals, blocked punts, missed or made field goals, probably a little bit less of that, but just some weird shit happening. They seem to be more on the beneficiary side of those on special teams, so maybe that helps them for the one-score games. But if you can just kind of assume it's even, it's a neutral script, this team's going to have to be a top 20 to 25 team at least to win 7 games against this schedule, you'd have to believe. And I just don't see that. They've only really been that one time under Shane Beamer, and I don't have confidence in his ability to elevate his team. If he does have a positive trait, it's that he's a good culture guy. The team seems to like him and play hard for him, but I certainly wouldn't say that he maximizes his chances to win on Saturday. In-game coaching, game week preparation, coordinator hires, definitely not an asset for him, which a program like South Carolina probably needs to elevate. Now, they do have 2 elite blue-chip talents in Lenora Sellers and Dylan Stewart, so maybe those guys can take over a few games and win them by themselves, but I'm not going to bet on that, so I'm going under 6.5 for the Cocks.